Hello, this is Slow Night, Sleepy Stories. They say that human worries are endless, like waves crashing upon the shore. Just as one worry fades, another rises to take its place. Master Wonhyo called this endless worldly cares, but he also taught us that waves only exist because of the wind. If the wind stops, the ocean becomes still. Tonight we will stop the wind in your mind. You don't need to fight your thoughts one by one. Instead, just watch the screen. In 5 minutes, this light will slowly fade into darkness. Imagine that your worries are fading along with it, dimming, softening, and finally disappearing into the void. When the screen turns completely black, let your mind rest in that peaceful silence. Let go of the endless waves. The night is now still. Endless anguish beyond Mujin. The passing of the king came as a great shock to Wonhyo. Wonhyo had been so absorbed in interpreting the Avatamsaka Sutra, Flower Garland Sutra, that he paid little attention to worldly affairs, nor did he have the peace of mind to do so. He was living a life focused solely on observing the perfect Buddha nature. Although diplomatic relations with Goguryeo, Bakche, and Tang China were in a critical state, Wonhyo had no intention of interfering in such matters. Even if he happened to hear such grave news and feel a momentary interest, he would forget it all as soon as he faced the scriptures. Wonhyo's goal was not merely to annotate the Avatamsaka Sutra. Once he finished the awakening of faith in the Mahayana and the Avatamsaka Sutra, he wanted to annotate all the important Mahayana sutras, including the Lotus Sutra and the Diamond Sutra. Remembering how difficult it had been for him when he first read Buddhist scriptures, Wonhyo wanted to write in a way that was easy to understand, to let people know just how precious and important these scriptures are to us. That is why he had renounced all of life's pleasures and set his will on annotating the scriptures. After Wonhyo has walked this earth, I will ensure there is no one who does not know the way of Buddha. This was Wonhyo's intention. Wonhyo took Manjushri Bodhisattva as his personal guardian Buddha and looked up to Nagarjuna as the senior figure he adored. It fit Wonhyo's will that Manjushri Bodhisattva gave up the position of a Buddha to remain an eternal Bodhisattva, spreading the way and becoming the teacher of all Buddhas. He, too, thought to follow Manjushri's example and become one who spreads the way. The reason Wonhyo read the Amitabha Sutra with devotion and wrote a commentary on it was partly because he resonated with the supreme ideal of the Pure Land of ultimate bliss, where all the superior good people meet in one place, meaning only good people gather and not a single evil person exists. But it was also because the great vow of Bhikshu Dharmakara, the previous incarnation of Amitabha Buddha, appealed to his heart. If anyone hears or calls my name and cannot escape the evil paths, I will not attain enlightenment. Therefore, Wonhyo did not hope for his own liberation, rebirth in paradise, or even Buddhahood. He only hoped that there would be not a single sentient being who did not know the way of Buddha. It was not that Wonhyo was unaware of the impermanence of all things. The Nirvana Sutra was a scripture he read with as much devotion as the Avatamsaka Sutra. However, never had he felt the impermanence of things as acutely as when he heard of the passing of King Sungmin, who received the posthumous title of Queen Jindaok. Was it not just 7 or 8 days ago? It was on the rainy 3rd day of the 3rd month that Wonhyo lectured on the 10 stages chapter of the Avatamsaka Sutra at the royal palace. Did the king not listen to the sermon with that healthy, generous body on that day? Yet that person has passed away. The king's body, filled with sorrow, was buried next to Saryang Palace, where she had enjoyed staying and where she had last heard Wonhyo's sermon. After the king passed away, Wonhyo was called into the palace. While all the monks who had been respected by the king during her lifetime were called, Wonhyo was summoned specifically by the king's will. The will requested that Dharma Master Wonhyo explain the scriptures before the royal body was placed in the coffin. Jajang Yulsa was deeply displeased with this testament and opposed calling Wonhyo. Jajang had given the precepts to the king and had guided everything like a regent during her 8-year reign. This was true not only for Queen Jindaok but also from the time of the previous ruler, Queen Seondeok. It was Jajang, even more than Kim Chunchu, who influenced the Silla court to wear Tang dynasty clothing and abolished the Silla era name in favor of the Tang era name. Furthermore, it was actually Zhejiang who made Kim Chunchu establish close ties with Tang. Taking advantage of the respect he received from the Tang court, Zhejiang devoted himself to making Silla intimate with Tang. Given this, it was unbearable for Zhejiang that the final Buddhist ceremony for Queen Jindeok was entrusted not to him, but to the young monk Wonhyo. However, Alkion, the Sangdaedang, highest government official, suppressed Zhejiang's opposition with his authority. Zhejiang angrily shook his sleeves, left the palace, returned to Huangnongsa Temple, and lay down, claiming illness. Unaware of these circumstances, Wonhyo preached the Amitabha Sutra at the king's funeral hall. Wonhyo considered it fortunate to preach the scripture one more time by the king's side before her body was burned to ashes. It was unexpected that Wonhyo preached the Amitabha Sutra. Not only the gathered monks but also Alkion, Kim Chunchu, and Kim Yushin found it surprising. This was because at that time in Silla, high monks like Zhejiang, Hayatong, and Myeongrang mostly belonged to the esoteric Buddhism sect, and intellectual monks like Wonhyo revered the Avatamsaka, Lotus, and Prajna Sutras. Wishing for the Pure Land was considered a practice for the ignorant lower classes. Therefore, mantras were revered more than chanting Amitabha, and only a select educated group enjoyed the treatises. However, Wonhyo decided to preach the Amitabha Sutra for the king on this day. Since the king had passed away, he felt there was nothing else to do but pray for her rebirth in the pure land of ultimate bliss. Wonhyo raised his voice at the beginning. Namu Amitabha, homage to Amitabha Buddha. He chanted loudly. Wonhyo naturally had a booming voice, but in the silence before the corpse, the sound was loud enough to startle people. Wonhyo hoped this sound would reach the king's ears. He hoped that wherever the king's soul might be, this chanting sound would resonate there. From the perspective of the Silla people's indigenous beliefs, Pungryudo, the king's spirit would have ascended to the sky or become a spirit of the mountains or seas. Even so, Wonhyo hoped that through his chanting, the king's spirit would be reborn in the Pure Land. Even with a body as supremely high as the ruler of a nation, one could not escape death in the end. All kinds of medicines were used, and high priests performed all secret methods to pray for the extension of Your Majesty's life, yet Your Majesty has passed away. Wonhyo preached on impermanence with these opening words, then read the text of the Amitabha Sutra and explained the beauty of the Pure Land and the great vow of Amitabha Buddha. Finally, Wonhyo closed the scripture and said, "Where is the Pure Land of ultimate bliss that is said to be to the west? It is right here. Where is the Avicii hell? It is right here. Who are the ones listening to the Dharma day and night at the assembly of Amitabha Tathagata? It is the good men and women gathered right here. Through the supreme karmic connection of the late great king, we have all been born in this country and are listening to the Dharma of Amitabha Buddha. However, the reason we do not yet consider this place the Pure Land and do not recognize the birds singing in the forest as Kalavinka birds, but see them as crows and magpies, is because our minds live in hell. Creating the Pure Land is up to our minds, and walking in hell is also up to our minds. The three realms are merely the mind, and all phenomena are merely consciousness. Uisang refer exactly to this. Now that the new king has ascended to the high seat, if all officials and the 10,000 people discard the mind of hell and possess the mind of the Pure Land to make Silla a pure land, this will be the way to inherit the will of the late king and pray for her repose. After finishing his speech, Wonhyo loudly called out Namu Amitabha again. Wonhyo genuinely hoped that the late queen would be reborn in the Pure Land. The king enjoyed Mahayana Buddhism, but she had never completely cast off her worldly anguish. The king was also a beautiful young woman. She wanted to be a wife and a mother, but as someone on the throne, none of that went as she wished. Wonhyo felt that King Songman, Queen Jindeok, had feelings for him. He felt it deeply, especially at the Dharma assembly on the third day of the third month. Wonhyo clearly saw the light of anguish in the king's eyes. He heard passion in her voice and smelled the fragrance of anguish emanating from her body. However, as the king passed away, the tomb was built, and the greenery grew thicker. Wonhyo's thoughts of the king became even more desperate than before. It was not merely the heart of a subject adoring a monarch. To Wonhyo, King Sungman felt endlessly pitiable. Wonhyo would often sit alone at his desk and shed tears. Oh, what is happening to me? Wonhyo reflected on himself like this. Kim Chunchu ascended to the throne as the new king. The officials tried to enthrone Alkion, the Ichen rank, but Alkion firmly refused, saying, "I am old and lack virtue," and strongly argued, "Lord Chunchu is truly a hero to save the world." Thus, Chunchu ascended to the throne. This king is King Taejong Muyol, who would later destroy Baekje. As the new king ascended and the traces of the former king gradually faded, Wonhyo's sorrow for King Sungmun became even more intense. "I have never seen you grieve in your life, master, but lately you constantly show a sad expression." "What is the matter?" asked his senior disciple Simsang. "I am sad because my spiritual power is insufficient," Wonhyo answered honestly. "What do you mean your spiritual power is insufficient?" I failed to give a satisfactory answer to the late king when she asked so earnestly that day. "Why didn't you answer, 'I will do so,' when Her Majesty asked so earnestly?" Watching from the side, cold sweat ran down my back. That is why I say my spiritual power is insufficient. If I had the confidence of the monk Seonye, I would have promised to be with her life after life. But looking inside myself, I am full of anguish and do not know what I will become in the future. So how can I ask someone else to follow me? Furthermore, if I were to lead the person I served as king into an evil path, what greater sin could there be? That is why I could not answer. But how sad Her Majesty must have been at that time. She must have been sad. But she will not follow me, she will call me. Where to? Anywhere, wherever she goes. It was Her Majesty who called me to this life too. Then he almost completely stopped writing the commentary on the Avatamsaka Sutra. "Are you not writing the commentary anymore?" asked Simsang. "What do I know that I should write a commentary? I think I need to know myself first," was his reply. Once he said to Simsang, "What do you hope to gain by drawing water, cooking rice, and suffering like this for me? There is nothing to learn from me, so go elsewhere and find a teacher." 49 days passed since the king's death. Temples across the country held the 49th day ceremony for the late king. The new king, Chunchu, thinking of the late king's old wishes, sent Queen Mumyong and Princess Ayuda Yosok, who had become a princess, to Bunwangsa Temple to pray for the king's repose. Queen Mumyong took Princess Yosok Ayuda and entered Bunwangsa. "Master, Her Majesty the Queen and Princess Yoseok have arrived," it was announced. Wonhyo had been shutting himself in his room and hadn't even come out to the temple yard lately. Wonhyo answered simply and stayed still. "Are you not going out to greet them?" urged Simsang. Wonhyo reluctantly put on his outer robe, picked up his rosary, and went out. Seeing the queen enter the side hall from a distance, Wonhyo quietly returned to his quarters. It was the first time Wonhyo saw Lady Mumyong wearing the formal attire of a queen. It was also the first time he saw Princess Yosok dressed as a princess. Princess Yosok looked the part. Wonhyo's thoughts of the late king became even more desperate. It pained him to see the living sharing and enjoying the glory left behind by the deceased. The temple asked Wonhyo to be the leading officiant, but Wonhyo refused. So monk Myeongrang was set to be the officiant. Myeongrang, like Wonhyo, was a man who had donated his own house to make a temple. That temple was called Gumgwangsa or Gumusa. His mother was Jajang's sister. He had studied in Tang, learned the Yogacara teachings, returned to Silla, became the founder of the Sinin Divine Seal School in Korea, and was a high monk who later built Sachonwangsa Temple to repel Tang forces using esoteric rites. Monk Myeongrang sent someone to ask Wonhyo to preach, but he refused that as well. Although Myeongrang was far senior to Wonhyo, he personally visited Wonhyo's room. Monk Myeongrang in a brilliant gold robe and Wonhyo in a patched hemp robe made a strange contrast. Due to their different sects, there had been little interaction between the two. "Why do you refuse to preach, master?" asked Monk Myeongrang after exchanging greetings. "I have no dharma to preach," answered Wonhyo. "The late king trusted you greatly during her lifetime, and I heard you preach the 10 Stages Sutra at the palace on the 3rd day of the 3rd month. It seems it would be meritorious for the spirit if you preached the Dharma for this 49th day ceremony." Despite Myeongrang's plea, Wonhyo shook his head a couple of times. "I, a humble monk, could bring no benefit to the late king even when I preached while she was alive. What preaching could I do now? Thus he refused. The public, who thought there would surely be a sermon by Dharma Master Wonhyo, found it unexpected. Wonhyo mingled among the crowd. Even when the crowd circled the pagoda, chanting loudly at the end of the ceremony, Wonhyo was mixed in with them. This was something Wonhyo rarely did. So Simsang and others thought it strange. But was that all? Wonhyo raised his voice and called out, Namu Amitabha. Simsang found it even stranger. Princess Yosok followed behind Wonhyo, chanting as well. Wonhyo chanted loudly like a man almost out of his mind. Because his voice was naturally booming, everyone could hear Wonhyo's chanting. Whenever the procession turned a corner, Princess Yosok passed people one by one until she was right behind Wonhyo. The princess forgot that others might find it strange. Passion welled up in her heart. King Songman had passed away, and now the 49th day ceremony was nearing its end as the roosters began to crow. The intermediate spirit of King Songman must have already gone where it was destined to go. Whether she went to the Pure Land or was reborn in heaven or as a human in some mother's womb, she must have already abandoned the memories of being King Songman. Now, Princess Yosok was no longer Ayuda serving King Songman. Now she could think of Wonhyo as much as she wanted. She could pour out the passion she had suppressed for 8 years without hesitation. Princess Yosok stepped right up behind Wonhyo and stepped in his footprints. She stepped in every single one without missing. It felt as if her small feet were being buried deep inside Wonhyo's large footprints. The princess decided she would follow Wonhyo anywhere. She decided that if Wonhyo tried to shake her off, she would hang on to his robe and follow him. In the princess's ears, there was only the sound of Wonhyo's chanting, only that booming voice. She heard no other sounds. Unnoticed, her younger sister, Princess Jijo, came up behind Yosok and tugged lightly at her sleeve. Princess Jijo was still only a 15-year-old maiden. Princess Yosok suddenly came to her senses, realized her face was flushing hot, and hesitated for a step, but then took a large stride to catch up with Wonhyo, who had moved a step further away. How long this lasted, no one knows, but the metal gong rang and the crowd stopped chanting and circling, returning to their places one by one. Princess Yosok returned to her mother, Queen Munmyong, along with Princess Jijo. Queen Munmyong glared at Yosok once. Wonhyo returned to Muay Hall after the ceremony. "I saw you chanting for the first time today, Master," Simsang said as he took Wonhyo's robe. "That was the only offering I could make for the late king," Wonhyo replied. "Did you know that Princess Yosok was following behind you?" "I knew," Wonhyo sighed. "I saw Princess Jijo for the first time today," Simsang said. Simsang pictured Jijo's flower-like beauty before his eyes. "It is all endless anguish," said Wonhyo. "Does anguish arise even in your heart, Master?" Simsang looked up at Wonhyo's eyes like a fearful person waiting to be scolded. There seemed to be fire in Wonhyo's large eyes, so Simsang lowered his head. It was because there was a light in Wonhyo's eyes different from what he had imagined. Those eyes were still the eyes of a bodhisattva determined to subdue the demons. Simsang thought they were not the eyes of someone shaken by Yosok's beauty, and he felt ashamed of himself but also relieved. He believed again that Wonhyo was a teacher worth relying on. However, Wonhyo's heart was not necessarily as calm as Simsang thought. After that, in accordance with King Songman's will, Yosok Palace took care of Wonhyo's needs. The first thing the maid from Yosok Palace brought was summer clothes for Wonhyo. It was 20-count linen, a rare luxury at the time. This linen had been bestowed from above as fabric for the princess's clothes. The king pitied his daughter who had become a widow at a young age, so whenever there was good fabric or delicious food, he always thought of the princess. When the princess received this fine linen, she immediately thought of making clothes for Wonhyo. Now that she was a princess, she had no need to hold a needle and thread, but Princess Yosok cut and sewed it herself. Thinking it was clothes for a holy man, the princess designated a separate hall in the rear garden of Yosok Palace as a sewing room, bathed and purified herself, lit incense in the room, prepared new scissors, needles, and thread, and with utmost sincerity in every stitch she sewed the seams. It was the 5th month. The The willows and elms by the Ari River were thick with greenery, and orioles sang ceaselessly. Uisang Palace was located on the western bank across the elm tree bridge of the Ari River. This Uisang Palace was where princesses had resided for generations. Whether they were princesses before marriage or widowed princesses, they lived in Uisang Palace. Princess Pyongyang, who adored the martyr Ichidon and grew old alone chanting, had lived here. When Isabu conquered Usan-guk, Ulung Island, the king's daughter, Star Princess, was captured and briefly served the princess at Uisang Palace. When Sadaham destroyed Gaya and captured the king's family, the princess of Gumguan-guk also stayed at this palace as a servant. Queen Sondeok also stayed here when she was a princess of King Jinpyong. Because of this, Uisang Palace was a place where outside men did not enter. There were only the princess, several court ladies, a few guarding soldiers, and servants. It was a clean and quiet place. There were flower beds and gardens in the courtyard and rear garden. In Seorabeol, the capital of Silla, which did not have beautiful natural scenery like the Baekje capital, they had to create beautiful scenery artificially. Anapchi Pond was one example, and they built the Sun and Moon Bridge over the Moon River at Wolsong, borrowed the foothills of Namsan to plant trees and flowers, built rockeries, and drew water to create streams and ponds. Even private homes began to do this. Because Princess Dokman, later Queen Sondek, was well versed in Tang scholarship and culture, as well as Buddhist scriptures, she put great effort into creating gardens in the front and back yards of Uisang Palace. Her father, King Jinpyong, let his only daughter do whatever she wished, and having been on the throne for 54 years, he often visited Uisang Palace to enjoy seeing the flower garden his daughter had created with such devotion. First, she drew water from the Ari River to create a pond called the Pond of Eight Virtues in the yard. The Pond of Eight Virtues is a pond in the Pure Land described in the Amitabha Sutra, said to be neither cold nor hot, extremely clear, and flowing over gold sand and pebbles. Then she planted various flowering trees and grasses by the pond, and decorated it with jade from Namsan and sea sand and stones from the East Sea. Second were the peonies. When peony seeds and a painting of peonies arrived from Tang, the princess observed that there were no butterflies or bees in the painting, and famously predicted that the flowers would have no scent, surprising her father and the ministers. The princess cultivated peonies at Uisang Palace to make flower beds. Princess Deokman left Uisang Palace to become queen. She reigned for 16 years and passed away, and King Sungman became king and passed away after 8 years. So, Uisang Palace had been empty for 23 years before meeting its new owner, Princess Ayuda. The ownerless Uisang Palace was dilapidated and overgrown, but in return, the trees had grown, moss had covered the rocks, and the traces of human creation on the Pond of Eight Virtues and the rockeries had faded, making them look natural. The peonies, now over 30 years old, were old trees showing even more elegance. Strangely, the peonies that had no scent in Tang emitted a fragrance in Silla. Whenever Princess Uisang sat alone sewing the linen clothes for Grand Master Wonhyo, the scent of peonies would drift in on the wind. It had been over a year since Princess Uisang became the mistress of this house. The princess saw the peonies blooming in this garden for the second time. The garden was tidied up, and fresh pebbles and sand were laid in the Pond of Eight Virtues. However, she ordered that the grass on the banks not be touched and the frogs playing there not be disturbed. Even if I can't do more, thought Princess Uisang, let the animals live as they please inside Uisang Palace. Amidst this, Princess Uisang sent the summer clothes she had hand-sewn to Wonhyo at Bunhuangsa via a maid named Maya. The maid came with a servant girl. "Master, someone has come from Uisang Palace." Simsang announced this while Wonhyo was sitting at his desk looking at Namsan. "From Uisang Palace?" Wonhyo broke his meditation and turned his head to Simsang. "Yes, a maid has come with a letter and items from Princess Uisang." Simsang placed a sealed letter in front of Wonhyo. Wonhyo looked at the letter, remained silent for a while, and finally picked it up and opened it. On Baekje paper it read, "1 branch of peony, 1 suit of rare clothes." And beside it, in smaller characters, 5th, H day of the 5th month, disciple Princess Uisang bows and respectfully presents. There were no other words. Wonyo nodded. Simsang guided the maid in. The maid entered Wonyo's room holding a cloth wrapper embroidered with peonies, and the servant girl followed holding a Goguryeo vase with a peony in it. The maid knelt on her right knee before Wonyo, placed the cloth wrapper in front of him, then took the vase from the servant and placed that too before Wonyo. Then she stood up again and performed the 5-point prostration, knees, elbows, and forehead touching the ground. It is exactly the same bow performed before the Buddha, a bow to a teacher. The servant also performed the same bow behind her mistress. The maid wore red clothes and the servant wore green. Wonyo sat and received these bows without reason. Not returning the bow was intended not to diminish the merit of the one bowing. This flower is the most beautiful one blooming in the Uisang Palace flower bed, and these clothes were cut and sewn by the princess herself. As the days are getting hotter, she offers them as summer clothes for the master. I was ordered to convey this. The maid delivered the message to Wonyo in court language. Wonyo first lifted the peony flower higher than his head and placed it on the desk, then lifted the cloth wrapper and put it down again, saying, "I am humbled by her concern." The maid waited to see if Wonyo had any questions, but he said nothing, and she wondered if there would be a reply letter, but there was no instruction. Wonyo just sat staring at Namsan, visible over the roof again, as if he had forgotten everything. Unable to wait any longer, the maid said, "I shall take my leave," and stood up and bowed. Wonyo pretended not to see the maid's bow. Again, it was to avoid breaking the merit of the maid bowing to the 3 jewels. Even after the maid from Uisang Palace left, Wonyo sat staring at Namsan until the day ended. The peony flower and the cloth wrapper remained in their places. "Master, what will you do with these clothes?" Simsang finally asked Wonyo. "What?" Wonyo answered while still looking at Namsan. "I mean these clothes. Princess Uisang made them and sent them with such effort, so please change into them." "You wear them." "But the princess made them personally for you, master." Simsang thought of how Princess Uisang had followed behind Wonyo on the night of Queen Jindaok's 49th day ceremony. "My clothes are still intact. Your clothes are worn and dirty, so you wear them. Then the princess will feel sorry. She made them to give to you." Simsang untied the wrapper. It contained a set of monk's outer robes, an inner robe, trousers, a jacket, a pair of socks, a sash, and a pointed hat. The 20-count linen was finer than silk. "Master, are you ignoring the sincerity filled in every stitch? Master, please look at this." Simsang lifted the clothes and held them out to Wonyo. The smell of linen, incense, and peonies hit Wonyo's nose. He saw the yellowish color and the white stitches. Seeing them, the smell of linen, peonies, and some fragrance pierced his nose even more. It seemed to warn Wonyo of something ominous. And that ominous thing seemed impossible for Wonyo to resist with his power. In every stitch of those clothes, he saw Princess Uisang's hands. He saw her body. "This is clearly a demonic realm," Wonyo cried out inwardly. "It is anguish, anguish. I must overcome this, but I don't seem to have the strength to overcome it." Wonyo tensed his lower abdomen. "I told you to change into them quickly." Wonyo raised his voice and glared at Simsang. "Do I really wear this?" Simsang opened his eyes wide. "I said wear it, so wear it. Change right now," Wonyo shouted in an even stricter voice. Simsang, feeling awestruck, bowed, took the cloth wrapper, and withdrew to the next room. Simsang changed into the clothes Princess Uisang had made and sent to Wonyo. Just as Wonyo, he put on everything including the outer robe and returned to Wonyo. "Master, I have dressed like this." Simsang stood behind Wonyo, who was looking at Namsan, and spoke. It fits." Wonyo said this and smiled broadly. "Now that I have changed into these clothes, what should I do?" Simsang asked worriedly. "Who made those clothes?" Wonyo asked. "Princess Uisang made them personally for you, master," Simsang replied. "Know that it is clothes made by a certain sentient being for a certain sentient being, and wear them." "I cannot wear them knowing that." "Why?" "I cannot forget that the noble, young, and beautiful princess made them personally. Wearing these clothes, I feel awestruck and it feels like a dream. If these were made for me, I would have no regrets even if I suffered in hell for 1,000 kalpas." Simsang's tone was very excited. His voice trembled. Seeing Simsang excited, Wonyo smiled. "If you were told to quit being a monk and become the son-in-law of Uisang Palace, what would you do?" Wonhyo asked. I would rather become the teacher of the king than become the son-in-law of Yosok Palace, Simsang answered. Yes, you will become the teacher of the king. Wonhyo said this, and indeed, Simsang later went to Nara, Japan, lectured on the Avatamsaka Sutra before the emperor, and became the founder of the Japanese Keigen Avatamsaka school. Since you are wearing new clothes, go to Munsu Temple. Wonhyo suddenly gave this order. Go to Munsu Temple? Simsang asked, puzzled. Yes, go and decide on a place for me to stay at Munsu Temple. Master, do you intend to go to Munsu Temple? Yes, what about here? Someone else will come and stay here. Simsang went to Munsu Temple and returned in a few hours. Munsu Temple was a small hermitage on Namsan. Wonhyo left behind all the books, paper, brushes, and ink he used, put only one set of clothes and his alms bowl in his knapsack, and left Bunwangsa that very day. Master, do you not feel sad leaving Bunwangsa where you have stayed for 10 years? If one feels sad leaving a temple where one lived for 10 years, what will one do when leaving the body where one lived for a lifetime? Ha! Simsang laughed as if his chest had burst open. The things he looked at, touched, the trees and flowers he tended, Simsang was able to leave them all without attachment. Simsang saw that he was wearing linen clothes the color of oriels while Wonhyo was wearing faded, coarse hemp clothes, and he laughed again. Why do you laugh? Wonhyo asked. I am wearing fine clothes, and you, the master, are wearing old clothes, so it is reversed. Simsang laughed again. As the two walked south past Gerim, a sound came closer. Hat, 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 hoyat, 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 hat. It is Dharma Master Dayan. Before Simsang finished speaking, an old man wearing rags, holding a staff with bark on it, more like a stick than a staff, and a large bell in one hand, came walking with swinging strides. His tattered sleeves swayed violently. He wore a belt made of straw rope used for tying bundles of wood. He was bald, but white hair had grown a few inches long around the edges and fluttered. His beard was patchy. His teeth were missing. As the old monk came close to Wonhyo's party, before they could greet him, he shook his bell. Clang, clang. Dayan, Dayan, great peace, Eoheo Dayan, Dayan. He put his hands together and shook them. His hands were large and his fingers thick. He was barefoot. His eyebrows stuck out long like horns, and white hair grew straight out of his large ears. His sunken eyes shone unusually bright. Master, how are you? It has been a long time. Wonhyo bowed respectfully with palms together. Oh, Monk Wonhyo, Dayan, Dayan, everyone Dayan, Dayan. Master Dayan seemed very happy, his whole face becoming a smile. I hear Tang troops have invaded Goguryeo, so the world is not at great peace, Dayan. Wonhyo said this. Emperor Taizong of Tang had sent Yingzhou, Governor Cheng Mingzhen, and Left Guard General Su Dingfang to invade Goguryeo starting in the 3rd month of that year. Heh, when is there ever no war? Dayan, Dayan, hat, 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 hat. Master Dayan laughed until his nose ran. But where are you going, Master? Dayan stopped laughing and asked Wonhyo. When he stopped laughing, he was a solemn old master. I am going to Munsu Temple. Munsu Temple? Yes. There are monks who chase ghosts at Munsu Temple, Dayan said. The monk who chased ghosts was Dharma Master Milbon. Milbon was the one who cured Queen Seondeok's long illness by reading the Medicine Buddha Sutra. At that time, it was said that the master's 6-ringed iron staff flew into the king's bedchamber, pierced an old fox and a monk named Beopchang from Hongyunsa Temple, and threw them down into the courtyard. Because rumors of such high magic spread, many monks and lay people who wanted to learn such magic followed him. What does it matter if there is a monk who chases ghosts? Wonhyo laughed. Sky ghosts and human ghosts are swarming, so it's not quiet. Ha ha ha, Dayan said. Master, did you not drink today? Simsang asked Dayan. Yeah, I'm just on my way out now. You're wearing new clothes. Swap those clothes with me. Dayan moved the bell to the hand holding the staff and touched Simsang's clothes with his hand. Do you also feel greed when you see new clothes like this, Master? Simsang asked and laughed. Yes, if I pawn these clothes, I can drink for 10 days. Dayan feigned innocence and said this. Then shall I swap with you? Simsang took off his knapsack. Oh, Dayan, Dayan, Namu Amitabul. Even so, you can't take off your clothes in broad daylight on the main road. Let's go to my house. Monk Wonhyo, let's go to my house. Have a cup of tea, talk, and then go. Dayan walked ahead, stumbling back the way he came. Wonhyo and Simsang followed. Birds of the setting sun cried in the old trees of Girim. Magpies chattered and crows cawed. Every time Dan moved his staff, the large bell rang, clang, clang. Dan carried cymbals, and when the sun was high, he would go to the gates of houses. It is Dan, 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 and strike the cymbals. Then the people of Seorabeol knew Master Dan had come and brought out rice. Once Dan got enough rice for one meal, he did not go to other houses, and if he didn't get rice, even after visiting 7 houses, he just returned with an empty bowl. There was no one who didn't know the monk named Dan. Dan's name was heard even in the palace. However, no one knew what kind of person Dan was. Children knew Master Dan as a funny old beggar, young people knew him as a good target for teasing, and old people knew him as a perfect way to kill time. So wherever he went, Master Dan was welcomed even if he wasn't treated with respect. However, few knew that Master Dan was a scholar deep in scriptures and a realized monk of high virtue and conduct. Nevertheless, anyone who met Dan felt their heart become happy and soft. No matter how worried or anxious a person was, seeing Dan made them forget it all and smile. Dan often stopped by taverns with what he begged, and even if drunk people were clamoring and fighting, once they heard Dan's cymbals or bell, they stopped fighting, and when Dan walked in saying, "Is everyone at peace? It's Dan, Dan," everyone laughed as if a happy event had occurred. They forgot the fight and offered drinks to Dan. When Dan got pleasantly drunk, rang his cymbals, and left, people laughed happily once more. Then it felt as if all the anger, hatred, and dissatisfaction in their hearts vanished. Dan led Wonhyo and Simsang up a pathless thicket on the western slope of Namsan. "Where exactly is your place, Master?" Wonhyo asked. "Ha ha ha! Am I not right here?" Wonhyo felt as if he had been hit by a club. "No, I mean where you sleep." Dan tapped his chest a couple of times with the hand holding the bell. "The place where I this body at night," Wonhyo responded. "Ha ha! I had a dugout near Hongyunsa where I spent the winter, but one day I came back and another beggar was there. Ha ha! So I gave it to him and stayed in a cave above the Alyong well for a while, and the cave was quite nice. Sun came in well during the day, moon came in well at night. I thought I could live there for life, but last night I went there and a raccoon with cubs was there, so I gave that cave to the raccoon. And since I couldn't go far suddenly, there was a small cave right up here, so I slept there all last night and until the afternoon today. Hat, 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 hat." Dan seemed to have forgotten the way to his home, wandering a couple of steps this way and that. Then he stopped abruptly in front of a rock and said, Isn't there a good house here? Here, let's sit here." He smiled broadly as if he had found something good. The rock jutted out, providing enough shelter for a couple of people to avoid rain underneath. "Here, sit down." Dan sat first. Wonhyo sat beside him. Simsang stood by, worried about dirtying his new clothes. Where did the person go, and there is only a set of hemp clothes? Hat, hat, hat." Dan looked at Simsang and laughed. Simsang was very embarrassed and hesitated, looking for a place to sit. Won't the new clothes get dirt on them, man?" Dan pretended to be angry. Simsang couldn't sit or stand and didn't know what to do. Ahem. Wonhyo glared at Simsang. Simsang wanted to resent Princess Yosuk, who had made and sent these clothes. "What would you do in this situation, Master?" Simsang challenged Dan. Dan laughed. Wonhyo and Simsang laughed too. Talking, the sun set. Master Dan ceaselessly told stories that made the two laugh. They all seemed like silly stories, but while silly, they all had substance. Because Dan went everywhere, from narrow alleys to markets, he had countless stories about human nature and the world. For example, stories about husband and wife fights, failures of greedy people, children's games and fights. Moreover, there was no mischievous child in Sorabeol whom Dan didn't know. When Dan encountered children gathering and playing, he could not just pass by. He always joined in. When he hit the cymbals or shook the bell, flapped his ragged sleeves, and danced, the children loved it more than anything, and even adults forgot their way and stood to watch. Only after the sun set and the children were called home by their parents to eat did Dan amble back to the cave on Namsan. Having done this for decades, the children who played with him became adults, and he came to play with their sons. Master Dan, though a monk, rarely entered temples. Master Dan was already famous in his youth. He was a disciple of Wonguang and had been to Tang, and in the early years of Queen Sundeok, he preached in the palace and was respected by the queen. Dan received teachings from Dharma Master Wonguang at Mount Huchu in Wu during the Sui dynasty. At that time, Master Wonguang was a Silla monk who was famous in China. It was when Wonguang gained the trust of the world by preaching the Prajna Sutra at Mount Huchu, now in Suzhou. There, Dan learned the Prajna Sutra from Wonguang and also met Jigong and Huike to hear Bodhidharma's teachings. Dan also learned mantras and esoteric Buddhism from Dharma Master Anhong. Master Anhong was respected by the Emperor of Tang and returned to Silla with the monks Vimalaksa, Nongada from the northern Indian kingdom of Udiana, and Buddha Sangha from the kingdom of Mathura, Java, staying at Wangyongsa to translate the Sandalwood Incense Starlight Wonder Woman Sutra. It is said that Master Anhong's magic was so high that he spread a mat on the waves and went towards the west, walking on air and water as if on flat land. Dan received the teachings and expectations of such great masters, but one morning he hid his traces. The world did not know his real name and knew him only as the begging monk Dan. Wonhyo also guessed that Dan was an extraordinary person, but he did not know that he was Wonguang's high disciple, Wongong. Therefore, while Wonan is known as Wonguang's Dharma heir, nothing is passed down about Wongong. Wongong was forgotten by the world and became Dan. As the sun began to set, Wonhyo said, "I shall take my leave," and bowed to Dan and rose from his seat. "Stay a moment. Is it right for the patriarch of the Avatamsaka sect, Great Master Wonhyo, to visit my house and leave without having dinner?" Dan stopped Wonhyo. This was the first time Dan called Wonhyo the patriarch of the Avatamsaka sect. This was a prophecy. "I see nothing to eat here. What will you give me?" Wonhyo looked at Dan, who was standing up. "Wait here a moment, Monk Wonhyo, and Monk Simsang, let's go get dinner with me." Dan took Simsang down into the valley. Wonhyo sat alone. The new moon of the 5th month had already begun to show its face in the west. The reddish light of the sunset was on the sky and mountains, and purple twilight began to settle in the valley. 2 squirrels ran towards him, stopped when they saw Wonhyo, changed direction slightly, and climbed up a rock. The smell of grass entered his nose afresh. The evening bells from countless temples in Sorabeol rang softly. In this deep quietude, Wonhyo felt his own insignificance. He felt all his pride shattering. One person with no hindrances passes beyond birth and death in a single path. Wonhyo felt he had not yet left birth and death. He thought Dan was truly the one with no hindrances. Knowing and becoming. Wonhyo realized there was a big difference and a great hierarchy between these two. Wonhyo knew the Avatamsaka Sutra well, but he felt he had not become the Avatamsaka Sutra. Wonhyo felt a kind of sadness, still far, not yet done. Wonhyo sighed like this. It was like the river god meeting the sea god. Wonhyo clearly saw himself not being indifferent to King Sungmin and Princess Yosok. Moreover, he felt ashamed of himself for not being able to accept the clothes Princess Yosok made and gave them to Simsang. Still far, not yet done. Wonhyo sighed once again. Wonhyo, who believed he was protected by all Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and worthy of offerings from humans and gods, felt his faith shaking. If Master Dan asked Wonhyo the reason for leaving Bunhuangsa, Wonhyo had been worrying about what to answer. "I am fleeing because I am afraid of Princess Yosok." He would have to answer like this. But can one detach from the attachment to Princess Yosok by changing locations? Observe the body as real form. All is tranquil extinction. Detach from self and attachment to non-self. This is the pure wondrous karma. Wonhyo thought of Manjushri's verse in the Tathagata's Light and Awakening chapter of the Avatamsaka Sutra. Though he knew in principle that this body seen as existing is actually an illusion, and its nature is neither newly created nor destroyed, it pained Wonhyo that he had not yet left the mind of an ordinary person who sees that illusion as truly existing and attaches to it. Wonhyo continued his thoughts. Believe solely in the Tathagata. The mind does not regress. Do not abandon mindfulness of all Buddhas. This is the pure wondrous karma. Do not change the mind believing in the Tathagata and always be mindful of the Buddhas. Wonhyo thought this was it. He was still a person in the process of becoming, a person who had started to become. He was not a finished person. To think occasionally that he was a finished person was a demon. Leave all pleasures of humans and gods, always practice the great compassionate mind. Save and protect all sentient beings, this is the pure wondrous karma. Yes. To leave the joys and sorrows of my one body and climb the 53 stages over 3 asankhyakalpas, step by step, day by day, with a compassionate mind and practicing kampa. Session. The realm of the Buddha cannot be spoken of, shown, or realized and known through discrimination. Even if one memorizes all the 80,000 Tripitaka smoothly, that is not knowing the Buddha's realm. As Bodhisattva Vajragarbha said, trying to interpret the Buddha's realm with our knowledge is like painting pictures in the void or catching the wind. Make a vow to generate compassion, gradually complete all stages. While making a great vow to become a Buddha and save sentient beings, and practicing compassion one by one enters the Buddha's realm little by little. And finally, in the dust of immeasurable Buddha lands, one dust becomes one Buddha. Able to be like that number, this is the pure wondrous karma. He would enter this realm. Thinking this, Wonhyo felt comforted and a new self emerged. When he thought of himself as a young body still growing, his current imperfection did not become sadness, but rather a hope for the eternal future. At the same time, Wonhyo did not forget that 3 asankhya kalpas are instantly one moment, and one moment is instantly 3 asankhya kalpas, and that in the tranquil nature, there is originally no such thing as Buddha, Bodhisattva, or sentient being. But he also did not forget that within this non-distinction and equality, Buddha, Bodhisattva, and sentient beings clearly exist to form a strict differentiated world. While Wonhyo was thinking these thoughts, Dan returned holding something in his hand, followed by Simsang. "Master, you must be hungry." Dan placed the bowl in front of Wonhyo. Inside were a few kudzu roots washed clean in water. Simsang returned with water. "Here, eat. Lately some mountain boars came into Namsan, so even kudzu roots aren't common. Hat hat hat." Dan said this and offered the kudzu to Wonhyo. "Are you not eating, master?" Wonhyo offered it to Dan. "I am an old man, so eating once a day is enough, but since it's awkward to tell only the guest to eat, I will eat too. Here, eat this. This thick one looks tender. Here, Monk Simsang, eat too." Dan offered to Wonhyo and Simsang like this and picked one up and put it in his mouth. "I have no teeth, so trying to chew with my gums, it doesn't chew well." Dan mumbled as he bit the kudzu root. Wonhyo chewed the kudzu root. Sweet juice came out. When Wonhyo was a horang wandering the mountains, he had dug up kudzu roots to eat, picked up acorns and pine nuts, peeled pine bark to eat, and spent days like that. Horang disciples left home at 15 or 16 with a bow and quiver on their shoulder and a sword at their waist. Unless one spent at least all 4 seasons training in the mountains, one could not become a horang. Wonhyo traveled around Mount Taebek, Mount Gumgang, Gegol, and even up to Mount Samgak and Mount Nangnim in Goguryeo. During that time, he cultivated courage and prayed to the mountain spirits, swearing great vows. Chinchu and Yushin also swore and prayed to destroy Baekje and Goguryeo and unify the 3 kingdoms during a 100-day prayer at Mount Taebek, Hambak. They were also 15 or 16 years old. Hwarang disciples entering the mountains would fight a bear if they met a bear and catch a tiger if they met a tiger. They slept under rocks, washed in streams, and prayed at mountain shrines. At that time, there were not many temples in the mountains yet. There were only shrines honoring the 3 spirits. After eating kudzu roots, drinking cold water, looking at the stars, listening to night birds, and talking, the 3 lay down under the rock. Wonhyo used a stone Simsang found as a pillow, but Dan pillowed his head on his arm, put his right side to the ground, and fell asleep immediately. His staff and knapsack were by his head. The weather in the 5th month was hot enough to sweat during the day, but cool at night. The bare ground was even colder. Wonhyo did not fall asleep easily. The stars were dense in the sky. Nightjars and owls hooted. Wonhyo thought he had lived too luxuriously for the past 10 years. When he was about to go to Tang with Uisang, Wonhyo also practiced asceticism. He even slept between graves. He picked up rags discarded by people, dyed them in mud to make his own clothes, and boiled the leftovers from monks' wash basins at temples to eat. But for the last 10 years or so, he lived a comfortable life with food and clothes bestowed from above at Bunhuangsa's Muay Hall. Wonhyo felt ashamed that this had become a habit, and he could not sleep well outdoors. Wonhyo thought of the time he was going to Tang with Uisang 10 years ago. At that time, Wonhyo was 23 and Uisang was 20. The two took a boat to Yangzhou and walked towards Luoyang. During the day, they begged for food at houses, and at night they slept inside tombs. Tombs in that region made a room with flagstones and placed the corpse in a coffin inside. So, a person could go inside and lie down. If it got dark while traveling, they would look for a graveyard lined with white poplars and enter. Sleeping inside a tomb at night, they seemed to hear ghost sounds, and their dreams were troubled. It was comfortable if it was an old tomb, but a new tomb was more frightening. There are many places without mountains in the plains of the Yangtze River, so in some capitals, they build a house in a remote place and put countless coffins in it. This is a communal ossuary. One day, Wonhyo and Uisang entered such a place to avoid rain at night. There was a newly brought coffin, new paper money scattered about, a new peony lantern lit, and food set before the coffin. Looking at the paper spirit tablet, it was a woman's corpse. Wonhyo and Uisang ate the food set before the coffin. They were hungry. The smell of the rotting corpse wafted from the coffin like a breeze. After eating, they wanted water, but there was none. Wonhyo took a bowl and went outside. It was raining softly in the summer night, and it was pitch black so he couldn't see an inch ahead, and all that tripped his feet were old grave mounds. Wonhyo barely found a puddle with water, drank a bowl, and brought a bowl back to the room with the corpses. Uisang drank too. Then they used the coffin as a bed and lay down. The candle in the flickering peony lantern went out, and it became dark. In his dream, the woman in the new coffin came out and said, "Why did you eat my food? Since you ate it, go with me to my house." And she pulled Wonhyo's sleeve. Wonhyo woke up while feeling afraid. In the morning, he read the Heart Sutra before the woman's coffin, prayed for her soul to escape the three evil paths and attain supreme enlightenment, and left the place of the dead. Wonhyo thought of the sweet water he drank last night, washed his face, and looked for the water puddle to drink once more before leaving. Wonhyo was startled. There was a human skull in that puddle. Seeing the skull with long teeth still remaining, and hands, feet, and shins, Wonhyo felt nauseous. Thinking he had drunk this water, his insides seemed to turn over. Wonhyo stepped back a couple of paces seeing this, then bowed down and drank the water from the puddle in gulps. Everything depends on the mind. Thinking there was no need to go to Luoyang, Wonhyo returned to Silla right then, and only Uisang went to Luoyang alone. Wonhyo thought there was nothing more to learn. Wonhyo recalled these old memories. Thinking these thoughts, Wonhyo fell asleep looking at the stars shining in the sky. He didn't know how long he slept, but he woke up to a very booming sound. It was the sound of chanting. The constellations were still brilliant in the sky, so it seemed to be the middle of the night. But no person was visible, only the sound, Namu Amitabha, Namu Amitabha. The chanting sound resonated. The sound was very clear and powerful. Wonhyo got up. Dan was not beside him. It must be Dan chanting. Dan seemed to be chanting from a place higher up than where they slept. Wonhyo strained his ears to listen to Dan's chanting. It was a sound he wanted to listen to forever. Wonhyo felt as if he was hearing such a clear sound for the first time in the world. It was a sound free of all anguish. It was reverent, compassionate, leisurely, yet majestic. Is it really Master Dan's voice? Wonhyo could not help but doubt, because it was different from the voice he spoke with usually. Wonhyo wondered how such a sound could come from inside Dan, who was funny, comical, and at times even seemed sly. Wonhyo wanted to find the owner of that chanting voice. Seeing Wonhyo put on his outer robe and drape his stole, Simsang also jumped up. "Master, where are you going?" Simsang also hurriedly put on his robe. "Do you hear that sound?" "Yes, I've been hearing it for a while." "How long has that sound been going on?" "I don't know how long. I also woke up to that chanting sound." "Whose voice is that? Is it Master Dan's voice?" "Well, I am wondering whose voice it is too." Wonhyo started walking towards where the chanting came from. Simsang followed. Fearing that making noise would disturb the chanter, Wonhyo muffled his footsteps. Simsang understood and did the same. They climbed quite high. The chanting sound became closer. As it got closer, the sound became more powerful and solemn. There, Wonhyo stopped abruptly. On a small peak, or rather, a slightly protruding nose of the mountain, the shape of a moving person was visible as a black silhouette against the blue sky. The sound of the bell was also heard. The shadow was bowing countless times, bowing once for every phrase of chanting. Wonhyo could not go closer. It felt as if his feet were glued to the ground. Without realizing when, Wonhyo stood with his palms together as if standing before a Buddha statue. Namu Amitabha. Namu Muryangsu Bul, Infinite Life Buddha. Namu Muryangwang Bul, Infinite Light Buddha. Namu Muegwang Bul, Unimpeded Light Buddha. Namu Mubyungwang Bul, Boundless Light Buddha. Namu Mujingwang Bul, Inexhaustible Light Buddha. Namu Muryangwan Bul, Infinite Vow Buddha. Calling the different names of Amitabha Buddha like this, and when reaching Infinite Vow, he repeated it even louder 3 times, and the 4th time, Namu Deja Debi Sobang Gongnakse Muryangwan Bul, homage to the great compassionate Infinite Vow Buddha of the Western Pure Land, he called out. While listening to the chanting, Wonhyo seemed to understand the true intention of Dayan's chanting. It was that Dayan was taking as his own vow the great compassionate vow of Amitabha Buddha, who established 48 vows and performed infinite ascetic practices for kalpas, because he could not bear to see the plight of sentient beings wandering in the ceaseless suffering of birth and death in the 3 realms and 6 paths. Even those in hell can leave suffering and attain joy just by hearing Amitabha's name. At the end of life, chanting Amitabha just 10 times leads to rebirth in the Pure Land. Even if one calls Amitabha with sincerity just once in a lifetime, one will surely not fall into the evil paths and create the karmic cause for rebirth in the Pure Land. That is the great vow power of Amitabha Buddha. However, to the ears of sentient beings who have accumulated much evil karma and whose karmic obstacles are thick, this grateful Buddha name is not heard. Even if the sound of calling Amitabha rings out every moment from the side, it is not heard by those whose ears are blocked by karmic obstacles. Ears are sharp for obscene and false sounds, but cannot hear the sound of truth. Now, which sentient beings, and how many, are listening to Dayan's chanting sounding like that? When Wonhyo heard the sound of Dayan bowing countless times and chanting countless times, he realized a new warmth and new brightness shining in his heart. This is the light of Amitabha Buddha, he thought. Wonhyo preached the Amitabha Sutra at Queen Sungman's funeral hall. He put his sincerity into it and believed he spoke well. Not only Wonhyo who preached, but some in the audience were moved by the sermon. But Wonhyo thought, how much greater is the benefit, religious movement, of a single phrase of Dayan's chanting heard now than a sermon of 10 million words. But such a chanting sound cannot be produced by just anyone. Just as with the same Gayagum, no one else can produce the sound produced by Urayak, a man from Gumguanguk who played the Gayagum best. Though the strings are the same, the fingers playing are different. Without high natural talent and decades of sincere study, one cannot produce Urayak's Gayagum sound. The chanting sound of Dayan now is Dayan himself. It was the sound of the way he had polished and polished for 70 years, emitting in its entirety. If only I could emit a sound like that. Wonhyo had this thought, but he did not think such a sound would come from his own throat. Wonhyo put his palms together towards where Dayan was and bowed his head. Wonhyo, who had not considered Jimyong, Jajang, or Anhong as teachers, thought of Dayan as a teacher at this moment. It seemed that Dayan keeping him here overnight with various funny stories last night was all an expedient of compassion to save him. With no eloquence, with no explanation of 1,000 words, could Wonhyo convey the emotion he received from Dayan's chanting now? That was an emotion only those present here could receive. It would not be possible without a spiritual power as great as Dayan's. Even if another person chanted here, they could not give such joy to people. Spiritual power, Dharma power. Yes, it is spiritual power, Dharma power. Wonhyo lamented like this. Dharma Master Anhong, who was said to fly in the air and walk on water like flat land. Dharma Master Wangguang, who emitted light when bound by Sui soldiers. Dharma Master Milban, who commanded and chased ghosts. or a certain layman who blew monk Inye into the air with a snap of his fingers, so he spent the night upside down with his head touching the ground and feet in the air. Even if they are said to have Dharma power, those are all trivial minor paths and magic tricks. Truly breaking the karmic obstacles of countless kalpas, polished and polished within the human heart to let the Buddha's light be received, that spiritual power is the true spiritual power. Wonhyo thought this. At a single phrase of Dayan's chanting, Wonhyo felt as if he lost all the pride he had held until now. What have I done in the past 10 years? Wonhyo reflected. Indeed, Wonhyo's commentary on the awakening of faith, commentary on the Avatamsaka Sutra, and the theory of 5 periods and 4 teachings were respected in Tang even more than in Silla, Baekje, or Goguryeo. And it is true that he opened a new path for Buddhist interpretation. But whom did I save with that? Did I even save myself? Which sentient being read my writing and received the joy I received from Master Dayan's chanting now? Is the writing I did for 10 years not just ink smeared on paper? Wonhyo realized how little value scholarship or knowledge has in moving a human soul. Bodhisattva Medicine King setting fire to his body to use as a candle offering to the Buddha, or Bodhisattva 10th. Never disparaging, bowing to everyone he met throughout his life, even while receiving ridicule, shouting, "I do not disparage you, you will become a Buddha." He seemed to understand them all. It is action. It is action. Only action has value. Wonhyo felt deeply, deeply afresh. Dawn broke bright. The small stars hid in the sky. Only the large stars shone brighter. Hat, hat, hat. Dayan, Dayan, it's Dayan. Dayan, coming down after finishing chanting, became the old Dayan seeing Wonhyo. Wonhyo performed the 5-point prostration to Dayan on the bare ground. Simsang did not understand the reason, because Great Master Wonhyo had never bent his knees before anyone. Simsang did not receive the emotion Wonhyo received. The environment was the same, but the capacity, gun, and receptivity were different. Hat, hat, hat! Dan! Dan laughed happily seeing Wonhyo bow. Dan was grateful for the great change occurring in Wonhyo's heart. He saw the movement of the Buddha's majestic power. Dan did not return the bow to Wonhyo. It was out of compassion, not to diminish Wonhyo's merit. Wonhyo's bow was a bow directed to the Buddha. Dan did not think he was receiving that bow. Simsang, not knowing this, was surprised by Wonhyo's prostration, but even more surprised by Dayan's arrogance and rudeness in receiving the bow standing up. Moreover, Simsang was a student of the Avatamsaka Sutra, so he thought lightly of the Western Pure Land or Paradise. He thought lightly of such other power, Tariki, or Amitabha's primal vow, considering them dharma gates for the ignorant masses. Simsang thought that reading many scriptures and gaining much knowledge would make him a bodhisattva and a Buddha. He was a so-called scholarly monk. The reason he adored Wonhyo was also because Wonhyo was the highest of such scholarly monks. The two bid farewell to Dayan and went to Munsu Temple. Wonhyo liked the quietness of Munsu Temple. There was no sound of water, but birdsong could be heard. In summer when it rained, the sound of water could also be heard from the room. Dharma Master Milbon had given up the room he used for Wonhyo. Outside the window was a not-so-wide yard with peonies and herbaceous peonies. Beyond the whitewashed wall was a single-pillar gate, and exiting it led to a valley with a stream. Sitting at the desk, the mountain and the side of the Dharma hall were visible. The yard was swept clean with broom marks, and squirrels came and went morning and evening. In the room, there was a statue of Manjusri Bodhisattva in a niche. It is a famous statue said to be created by the Baekje monk Hyechong. Hyechong, along with Hyeja of Goguryeo, helped Prince Shotoku raise Buddhism and build large and beautiful temples like Horyuji and Shitenoji. At this time, Silla also borrowed the hands of Baekje or Goguryeo monks for many temples and statues. This was because arts and crafts were more developed there. The Sakyamuni Buddha and the mural in the Dharma hall of Munsu Temple were by the hand of the Goguryeo monk Damjing. Damjing also helped Prince Shotoku spread Buddhism later. The murals of Horyuji were also painted by Damjing. Wonhyo thought, "I will plant bamboo in this yard." 3 days after Wonhyo arrived at Munsu Temple, a set of items for Wonhyo's use was sent from above. A desk, bedding, clothes, paper, brushes, ink, oil, incense burner, tea, brazier, etc. These were all things from the palace. The maid from Yosok Palace took the peony flower to Bunwangsa, and seeing that Wonyo had left, reported to Princess Yosok. Princess Yosok immediately thought it was because of the clothes she made and sent, and felt deeply ashamed. The princess thought there was no way the woman's passion stitched into every seam did not communicate to Wonyo. But I should have followed him to the end. The princess bit her lip tightly. Since there is King Songman's will. The princess tried to defend herself like this, but it was nothing more than an excuse. The princess asked her mother, the queen, to come see the peonies at Yosok Palace, and Queen Munmyong asked the king, so the two made their first royal visit to Yosok Palace. Once they became king and queen, it was difficult to visit even their own child's house. The king took the queen, Yushin, Crown Prince Beotman, Prince Mun, who had studied at the Guozijian in Tang, receiving Emperor Taizong's love, and other princes, along with the youngest princess Jijo, leaving the great palace of Wolseong to enter Yosok Palace by the Ari River. After ascending the throne, the king had not yet performed the rituals at the divine shrine due to the mourning period, so he had made no outings. However, since the 49th day ceremony for the late king had passed, he visited Yosok Palace in ordinary clothes. The people along the road spread mats and knelt on both sides of the road to look up at the new king's procession. Even though it was an informal outing, the king's dignity could not be unprepared. The carriage the king rode was made of red sandalwood and agarwood, the railing decorated with hawksbill turtle shell, gold, silver, and jade, with a yellow silk canopy and red silk curtains, pulled by 4 horses. On this day, the king did not wear Tang clothes, but traditional Silla clothes, as did the queen and princes. The king and queen sat side by side on cushions in the carriage, and in the second carriage sat Prince Moon, the king's son who wore the gold crown of Ichan rank, and behind him sat the king's youngest sons, Jigyong and Gaewon, also wearing gold crowns. They also received the rank of Ichan as princes. In the next carriage, Princess Jijo rode wearing pink clothes with a purple overcoat, accompanied by a maid. In the next carriage rode Daegakgon, highest rank, Yushin and Minister of Rights, Ichan Hangi, and in the very back rode Minister of War, Ichan Nami. The procession was escorted front and back by 1 Grand Supervisor, 2 from the Great Banner Unit, 2 from the Noble Banner Unit, and 150 mounted and foot soldiers. The soldiers wore red kerchiefs on their heads and red-trimmed combat uniforms, or yellow or blue depending on their rank. When the king's procession arrived at Yosok Palace, music erupted all at once from the palace. The first music was the Jura dance. 2 pairs of Jura players stood in front playing, and a pair of dancers danced to guide the king's procession inside. This was the first time for Yosok Palace, too, since receiving the visit of her father, King Jimpyong, when Queen Sondok was a princess. The king and queen got off the carriage at the gate and entered, stepping on freshly laid red earth. The color and scent of peonies filled Yosok Palace in May. The princess, wearing 30-count linen clothes and a yellow silk overcoat, with her black hair cut at the neck and hanging loose down her back, greeted her parents, the king and queen. "Oh, the peonies are in full bloom." The king was pleased to see the peonies in the yard. Princess Yosok was a daughter the king loved and pitied. The seat where the king sat was a pavilion not usually used, built as a side hall for when the king visited. This was also where King Jinpyong used to visit often. Inside the hall, on a mat with peony patterns, a silk cushion with peony patterns was laid. The queen, princes, Yushin, and ministers went up to this seat, while lower-ranking officials were fed in the corridors outside the middle gate. After the king was seated, Princess Yosok came before her parents again, bowed politely, knelt on her right knee, raised her left knee, and sat slightly to the side. The princess's face, with barely visible powder, could not be thought of as a widow over 30 by anyone. A moon-like round face, slender eyes visible as a straight line under thin eyebrows, a prominent nose, reddish lips, a neck like carved jade, white and slender fingers resting on her left knee. No matter how you looked, she was like a newly bloomed lotus flower. Only her dignified demeanor showed her age, if anything. Moreover, her appearance in the cloud-like linen clothes was modest, elegant, and noble. It was painful for the king to see such a daughter. It saddened him to let such a young and beautiful person grow old alone in Yosok Palace. When he saw the phrase in the letter the princess sent to her mother, "Peonies are already old, and green shade is thick." The king had decided to visit Yosok Palace. The peonies are old. If not seen for a few days, they might not be seen again. If a storm passes tonight, they will already be gone tomorrow morning. The king felt this way. The king intended to enjoy his day fully to please the princess. And if possible, he intended to understand the princess's will and find a new husband for her. The sun reached noon. Trays of food were brought in. The king had ordered the 6 departments to prepare this in advance. Since the king had sworn to destroy Baekje and Goguryeo, he forbade all luxury and kept his own life extremely frugal. He wore hemp clothes and straw shoes. However, no matter how frugal, it was a king's table. Fish and turtles from the East Sea, wild boars from Toham, ginseng and honey from Taebaek. These could not be missing from the table. Princess Yosok first poured wine and offered it to the king and queen. Then maids in blue clothes poured wine. "Here, Han Bulson, have a drink. Let's get drunk today." The king drank the wine the princess poured into a large jade cup and gave the cup to Yushin. "Your Majesty, I am humbled." Yushin touched his forehead to the floor. "Han Bulson, let us forget the distinction of monarch and subject today and return to being Chunchu Rang and Yushin, who ate from the same pot and slept in the same bed under Master Wonhyo." The king personally lifted the Goguryeo porcelain wine bottle and poured wine into Yushin's cup until it overflowed. "I am humbled. However, the distinction of monarch and subject is the distinction of monarch and subject, so how could I forget it for even a moment? Your command is too generous." Yushin knelt and received the cup to drink. "Han Bulson, return the cup to me." The king cheerfully held out his arm. Yushin prostrated and raised the wine cup to the king, and he personally lifted the bottle and poured wine into the king's cup. It was wine like liquid gold in a cup like white snow. The king drank that cup in one breath. The king gave the cup to Princess Yosok and said, "Child, pour wine for Han Bulson." The king harbored the intention of marrying Princess Yosok to Yushin. At that time, Yushin was a widower after Lady Maya had died. Princess Yosok hesitated for a moment, but it was a father's order and a king's command, so she reluctantly sent the cup to Yushin. "This is a cup offered to uncle." Princess Yosok clearly said these words. Yushin received the wine cup but doubted Yosok's words. The king was also surprised by those words, because the king intended to drink late into the day, and if Yushin got drunk, have him sleep at Yosok Palace with the princess. To the king, Yushin was an extremely precious person. The king is the son of General Ichan Yongchun. While it is true he carries the bloodline of King Namol, it was not necessarily a bloodline to ascend the throne. When the king ascended, he posthumously honored his father Yongchun as King Munhong. But his father Yongchun was not even a Galmanwang. To Tang, he said he was a cousin of Queen Jindeok, but in reality he was not Songgol, sacred bone. Until the past Queen Jindeok, they were Songgol, but from Chunchu, they could not be called Songgol. He was barely Jingol, true bone. Therefore, in Silla, where bloodline was viewed very importantly, the king was in a difficult position to feel secure. The only things he relied on were Yushin, who held the military power of the country with martial merit and received trust, and the trust from the Tang court. However, Chunchu gained trust in the Tang court because of Queen Jindeok and Jajang Yulsa. Jajang Yulsa was close to General Yongchun, and while being a monk, he was a very political figure and pro-Tang. In this respect, he had something in common with Yongchun, so he strongly recommended Chunchu and his son Beopmin to the Tang court. Also, due to Queen Sondeok's dying injunction, Queen Jindeok inwardly admired Wonhyo, but politically could not help but listen to Jajang. Thus, Chunchu made a name for himself both domestically and in Tang. Given these circumstances, the king had a great ambition to destroy Baekje and Goguryeo to unify the 3 kingdoms, and he thought this could only be done with Yushin. Whether for preserving the throne or unifying the 3 kingdoms, he wanted to give his daughter to Yushin. Princess Yosok or Princess Jijo are nieces to Yushin, but in ancient times that was no hindrance to marriage. With this intention, the king had Princess Yosok offer wine to Yushin. However, Princess Yosok's attitude was clearly a sign of refusal. The king thought, "Oh no," but soon pretended to forget it and ordered music to be played. At first, two people danced to the tune of 3 flutes, 3 strings, and the great drum with wooden clappers. 3 strings meant geomungo, gayagum, and pipa, and 3 flutes meant large, medium, and small flutes. The first tune was Spring Morning among Okbogo's compositions. It was a slow and soft dance. The dancers wore horned hoods, wide-sleeved purple clothes, orchid-red belts, gilt waistbands, and fish-skin shoes. Sinyal dance, Hangi dance, like this. Depending on the tune, the number of dancers was 3 or 6. Also, the dancers' clothes were different, red or blue. The gold ball dance involved playing with gold balls. When the balls rose high or low, they looked like moons and stars. The big face dance, wearing a gold-plated mask, depicted chasing ghosts holding a coral whip. The Sodok dance involved wild hair and a blue mask beating a drum. And the lion dance was a majestic dance where an old lion with lost fur shook its head and swung its tail. "Why don't you dance a Goguryeo dance?" The king was pleasantly drunk. The Goguryeo band came out. They wore red silk caps with feathers, wide-sleeved yellow clothes, wide trousers, and red leather shoes. 4 people danced the 5-colored cord dance, with top knots tied with red string and flipped back and gold bands on their foreheads. 2 of them wore yellow jackets and reddish-yellow trousers, and the other 2 wore reddish-yellow jackets and reddish-yellow trousers with very long sleeves. They wore black leather shoes. These 4 people lined up in pairs and danced. The instruments included 1 plucked zither, 1 bowed zither, 1 lying harp, 1 hand harp, 1 lute, 1 5-stringed lute, 1 beak flute, 1 mouth organ, 1 transverse flute, 1 small piri, 1 large piri, 1 peach bark piri, 1 waist drum, 1 fasting drum, 1 carrying drum, and 1 shell trumpet, plucking, blowing, and beating like this. To that rhythm, the 4 people danced. It is truly good, magnificent. The king slapped his knee and praised it. Although it was the music of an enemy country, he thought it very magnificent. From the Han dynasty to the Tang dynasty, Goguryeo music had a separate room even in the Chinese court, and the Silla court made it the right chamber music. "Look here, Hanbul son," the king called Yushin. Yes, Yushin was also full of inspiration from the Goguryeo music. "There will be a day to see Goguryeo music in Pyongyang, right?" The king spoke like this. "Yes, I believe that day will surely come. I will bind the Goguryeo king, make him kneel below the stairs, and surely make him watch the 5-colored cord dance on that day." Yushin shook his body once and trembled his shoulders once. Fire seemed to blaze in his eyes. Seeing Yushin do this, the king also closed his mouth and let out a huge breath. The atmosphere in the seat was fierce with killing intent. "Jijo, pour a glass of wine for General Yushin," the king commanded. "Yes." Princess Jijo filled a gold cup with wine and offered it to Yushin. Yushin prostrated to give thanks and raised 2 hands to receive the cup from the princess. When Yushin received the cup, the musicians played the majestic, descending heaven sound. Everyone felt a chill, feeling the solemnity. Yushin held the wine cup until the tune ended. Then when the tune ended, he put the cup to his lips, tilted his head back, and drained it. His half-white beard shook as if knowing the owner's tragic determination. "One more cup." The king offered wine. To Yushin again. Princess Jijo poured 3 cups in succession. As the cup was lifted in Yushin's hand, the old man's song and Osasic song played. Yushin received and drank 3 cups in succession, prostrated again to raise the cup to the king, and said, "Though I am old, I will never die until I destroy Baekje and Goguryeo and bind Ouija and Bojang to present to your majesty." Good, magnificent. The king received wine from the princess's hand and drank. "Pour again." The king also drained 3 cups. Meanwhile, the king ordered the musicians to play Garado, Gaya Capital. Garado is a Gayagam song composed by Ureuk, consisting of Upper Garado and Lower Garado, praising General Isabu's pacification of Gaya during King Jin's time. It was the war where Hwarang Sadaham achieved great merit at 17. "I shall perform a sword dance. How would that be?" Yushin asked the king's wish. "Do so." The king beamed with joy. It felt as if King Ouija and King Bojang were being bound and dragged below the stairs right then, which was thrilling. Yushin stood up and drew his sword. It was a Goguryeo sword, decorated with gold on a Paulownia handle. Goguryeo swords were good. The 3 flutes played. Yushin held the sword and seemed to think of something at first. Gradually, the sword rose high above Yushin's head. Yushin's body wriggled once, and the sword circled the air once. A streak of lightning flashed. The flute sound moved from plain mode to Wangzhou. Yushin's steps made increasingly powerful sounds, and the sword moved faster and faster. The music gradually tightened through Iazhou, Wolzhou, Banseupzhou, passed through Chulzhou, and reached Junzhou, becoming higher and fiercer. Following this, Yushin's sword wrapped around his body like a gale, like lightning, until Yushin became entirely a gleam of the sword. The music fell from the intensity, seeming to return to the smooth plain mode, and cut off. Yushin also returned to his initial calm posture. It was quiet like a forest after a storm passed. It seemed as if nothing had happened. The pavilion was quiet. The wind chimes tinkled, the scent of peony flowers wafted in. Yushin sheathed his sword and bowed once before the king. Everyone from the king down was filled with sadness as if tears would burst. Among them, the one most moved was Princess Jizhou. Yushin seemed not like a human, but a heavenly god. Yushin was originally not a Silla person. He is a person of Gaia, Gara, Gomguan. Gaia was conquered by General Isabu and merged with Silla during King Jinhong's time. It was September of the 23rd year of King Jinhong, when King Guhai of Gaia raised a rebellion against Silla. King Jinhong sent Minister of War Isabu to strike Gaia. At this time, Hwarang Sadaham led 5,000 followers to join the army, volunteered to be the vanguard, stormed the Jiandan Gate of Gaia, and raised a white flag on the gate. While the Gaia generals and soldiers inside the castle were at a loss seeing this white flag, Isabu led the main army and entered the castle bloodlessly. For this merit, the king gave the Gaia king and all the captives to Sadaham, but Sadaham released them all and made them loyal to Silla. Since then, it has been about 100 years. Guhai was Yushin's great-grandfather. Guhai's son Muryok became the commander of the Sinju province marching army, captured the Baekje king, and cut down 4 generals and 10,000 soldiers, achieving great merit. His father Seohyeon rose to Sopan rank and became the governor of Daryangju. When Seohyeon was still young, he fell in love with Manmyeong, the daughter of Sukol Maro, son of Galmanwang Seon Maro, Ipcheong. Taking advantage of the chaos caused by lightning striking the main gate, Manmyeong escaped from home and followed her husband, who was the governor of Mano-gun, and gave birth to Yushin. This has been mentioned before. Yushin became a Hwarang at 15 as a disciple of Muno and was called Yonghu, a Hyangdo, dragon flower fragrant disciple. Yonghwa refers to the world of the future Maitreya Buddha. This is because Yushin took Maitreya Buddha as his guardian Buddha, but it also meant he would unify the 3 kingdoms to create a good country like the Dragon Flower Assembly. It was a time when Goguryeo, Baekje, and Malgal were constantly invading Silla. Yushin harbored a great ambition to pacify Baekje, Goguryeo, and Malgal to bring glory to Silla, and entered a stone cave in the central peak at 17 to make a vow. Since enemy countries are unprincipled and invade our country so there is no day of peace, this body is but a small subject, but without measuring my strength, I intend to clear this calamity. May the heavens look down and lend strength to this body. He prayed like this. Yushin took only rice and a small pot, cooked rice himself, placed the pot on the rock, and offered it to the mountain spirits and all Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. Yushin did not sleep even when the night was deep. From the forest, tiger sounds and bear sounds were heard. But Yushin bathed in the waterfall again and again, removing distracting thoughts and waiting for the revelation of the spirits. He hung a left-twisted straw rope in the cave and attached paper streamers. And he dug up clean red earth to spread inside the cave and set pine branches at the door. As Yushin sat quietly with a candle lit, cold water drops fell from the ceiling, and in the shadow of the candle, various shapes of ghosts were seen. 2 days passed and 3 days passed. Spirits, until I gain the strength to destroy Baekje and Goguryeo, I will not rise from this seat. Yushin decided to gain strength or otherwise die like this. It was the 4th day. On the 4th day, when the sun was almost setting, an old man suddenly appeared in front of the cave. He wore arrowroot clothes and an arrowroot turban. "Why is a young master alone here in a place where there are poisonous insects and scary beasts?" he said. The old man's beard and eyebrows were white as snow. "Where do you come from, elder, and what is your noble name?" Yushin asked the old man politely. I am a person with no home. I go and stay according to karma. My name is Nanseong, hard to conquer. The old man answered like this. Nanseong is the 5th stage among the 10 stages of the Bodhisattva. After the stage of joy, the stage of leaving filth, the stage of light, and the stage of brilliance, one sheds all karmic obstacles, knows all there is to know, becomes a Dharma master, preaches the Dharma, and benefits sentient beings. The constant practices are giving, loving speech, beneficial action, and cooperation. And the constant mindfulness is on Buddha and Dharma, and the constant will is, I shall become the head and the superior for all sentient beings, up to becoming the reliance for all sentient beings. This is the realm of the Nansong stage Bodhisattva. Knowing this old man was a Bodhisattva of the Nansong stage, Yushin immediately bowed twice and said, This body is a Silla person. Seeing the enemies of the country, my heart aches, so I came here to await heaven's help and divine assistance. Elder of Fortune, please pity my sincerity and give me some secret art, he pleaded. Still, the old man remained silent. Yushin shed tears, bowed twice again, and said the same words once more. Still, the old man was silent. When Yushin bowed and prayed 7 times, only then did the old man open his mouth. Oh, it is magnificent that a young person harbors the intent to merge the 3 kingdoms. After transmitting the secret method, take care not to transmit this secret method carelessly. If you use this secret method for an unjust cause, disaster will return to your own body. Finishing his words, he left. Yushin followed the old man for about 2 li, but the old man was nowhere to be seen, and there was only a bright light on the mountaintop. The next year, seeing Baekje invading frequently, Yushin was even more outraged. He took his treasured sword, entered deep into a valley in Yeonbok Mountain, set up an altar, burned 5 kinds of incense, prayed as he did at the central peak the previous year, then drew his sword and placed it on the altar. Please send down heavenly light and spirit upon this sword. He prayed for 3 days. At the end of the 3rd day, when the night was almost over, the light of 2 stars, Haeosong and Gaksong, descended on the sword, and the sword moved by itself and rang, Sururung. Holding this sword and practicing military tactics without resting for a day, 17 years later, he joined the army of his father, Sopan Seoyeon, in General Yongchun's army and fought as the commander of the central banner. This was the famous Battle of Nangbiseong, the first battle where Yushin established merit. It was August. After Silla and Goguryeo armies fought back and forth for a long time over Nangbiseong, Silla had a temporary advantage, but on a dim moonlit night the Goguryeo army launched a massive counterattack. Silla soldiers died in countless numbers, and finally the situation forced a total retreat. At this time, Yushin went before his father, took off his helmet, and said, Now our army has been defeated. Since I have pledged myself to loyalty and filial piety all my life, facing battle, I cannot fail to be courageous. I hear that if you shake the collar, the clothes straighten, and if you lift the head rope, the net opens. I intend to become the collar and the head rope. He mounted his horse, drew his sword, charged into the enemy formation, cut off the enemy general's head, and returned. Silla soldiers were all moved and fought furiously, killing 5,000 enemy soldiers and capturing 1,000. For this merit, Yushin became the governor of Amnyangju. Amnyangju was Wonhyo's hometown. Desperate to find talent, Yushin recognized the potential in the boy Hwarang Wonhyo and recommended him to Queen Sondeok. Yushin hoped Wonhyo would become a politician or a soldier, but Wonhyo became a monk. Then, in the first year of Queen Sondeok, Baekje troops invaded Daryangju. Pumsok, the husband of Chunchu's daughter Gotaso, was killed in action, and Gotaso was taken to Baekje and committed suicide in prison. Thereupon, Chunchu volunteered to the king to go to Goguryeo to request troops and avenge the enmity with Baekje. Before leaving, Chunchu said to Yushin, You and I are one body and have become the pillars of the state. Now I enter Goguryeo. If I die and do not return, how could you be indifferent? To this, Yushin replied, If you go to Goguryeo and do not return, my horse's hooves will surely trample the royal courts of Goguryeo and Baekje. If not, with what face will I face the people of the country? Chunchu was moved by these words, and together with Yushin, they bit their fingers to draw blood, shared it to drink, and made a pledge. I will return in exactly 60 days. If I do not return after 60 days, know that we will not meet again." However, seeing Chunchu's extraordinary spirit, the Goguryeo king tried to kill him, saying, "Mamokyeon and Jukryong, Bamboo Pass, and north are Goguryeo land. If you return them, I will let you go. Otherwise, you cannot return." And he imprisoned Chunchu. Seeing that Chunchu did not return after 60 days, Yushin selected 3,000 death-defying warriors from across the country. Yushin gathered the warriors in front of Neol's shrine and said, "Seeing danger and offering one's life, facing difficulty and forgetting one's body is the intent of us Hwarang disciples. If one great man dies, he matches 100, and if 100 die, they match 10,000. So if we 3,000 pledge to die, we can traverse the world unhindered. Now our country's wise minister is captured in another land. We cannot help but save him with our lives. What are all your thoughts?" At Yushin's words, the 3,000 warriors all said in unison, "Even if we die, we will obey the general's command," and knelt and raised their hands to swear. The one who reported to the Goguryeo court that Yushin was invading with 3,000 warriors was a Goguryeo spy monk named Deokchang. Hearing this intelligence, King Bojang of Goguryeo was alarmed and treated Chunchu with courtesy and sent him back. Chunchu met Yushin's 3,000 death-defying squad right at Hansenju, now Seoul. Chunchu engraved Yushin's faithfulness in his bones and was grateful. Thus, Chunchu trusted Yushin even more. That Chunchu's wife Munmyeong is Yushin's sister has already been said. Such a Yushin had blocked Baekje army invasions several times in the meantime, and established great merit. Now, no one doubted Yushin's loyalty just because his ancestors were Gaia people. After Chunchu became king, there were two places he trusted. One was Emperor Taizong of Tang, and one was Yushin. This was Yushin. After watching Yushin's sword dance, the king praised him. "General, you have not aged yet." It became sunset, they were drunk, and the excitement was high. The banquet ended, and the king walked in the garden of Yosok Palace side by side with Yushin. As Princess Yosok said, the peonies were old and the greenery was lush. The old weeping willows by the pond stirred the water with branched shadows in the evening wind. Frogs in the grass were startled by the king's footsteps and jumped into the pond. The splashing sound drew the king and Yushin's eyes to the pond. Countless ripples arose in circles. "I hear Tang troops were defeated at Ansi Fortress again. What should be done?" The king worried about this. "Your Majesty, how about joining with Goguryeo and Baekje to strike Tang instead?" Yushin said this. The king stopped walking as if surprised and looked back at Yushin. The king's and Yushin's eyes met. They looked at each other for a long while, saying nothing. At this time, Princess Yosok guided the queen and Jijo to Songman Hall, where the princess resided daily. She intended to have a long blocked intimate talk with her mother and sister whom she had missed for half a year. The queen was also happy to have a family gathering after a long time. Once becoming queen, it was difficult to love her children simply as children like before. "Let us spend an hour as mother and daughters, just like when you were young living in the house under Mount Soyeong." Queen Munmyeong said to her two daughters. Being the mother of a nation, it was difficult to love only her own children as children. "Shall we invite father here as well?" Yosok asked her mother. "Let's do that. His Majesty misses you in his dreams, but being one who personally handles the 10,000 affairs of the state and military, when does he have time to talk intimately with his wife and children? So Ayuda, prepare a warm cup of wine, brew some tea, and ask His Majesty. His Majesty is probably waiting for you to ask." Hearing her mother's order, Yosok was very happy and immediately called a maid in blue, palace maid, to order the preparation of a wine table, and she began to brew tea herself. "Shall I make Tang tea or Jirisan native tea?" Yosok opened the tea cabinet and asked her mother. "Brew native tea. Does he not drink Tang tea all the time? Brew the Jirisan sparrow's tongue tea a bit strong." "Yes, Jirisan sparrow's tongue." Princess Yosok took out a tea canister made of Goguryeo porcelain and opened the lid. The tea canister was celadon inlaid with willow, cloud, and crane patterns. It was called a canister, but it was a jar. White charcoal from Mount Tabak burned red in the iron brazier. A Baekje tea kettle was placed on it, puffing out steam as the water boiled. Yosok put greenish sparrow's tongue tea in a tea grinder and ground it with a ceramic pestle. The tea ground with a rustling sound. "Sister, shall I grind it?" Jijo said from the side. "No, I will grind it. You watch the wine warming. Being daughters, you and I have few opportunities to be filial to our parents. Let us do our best at times like this," Yosok said to Jijo. The king came to Songman Hall with Yushin. Of course, the king was curious about what kind of life his daughter Yosok was leading. Indeed, the yard was swept clean and water was sprinkled on the stepping stones. The folding doors on the veranda were lifted, and bamboo blinds with willow patterns were hanging. The peonies below the stairs were already half withered. A maid lifted the bamboo blind, and the king ascended to the wooden floor. A large bronze mirror stood on a rosewood stand in the front, and Jirasan's sandalwood incense rose from a celadon incense burner. The king looked at the mirror for a moment and thought of Nail Shrine. Nail Shrine is the shrine in the Rooster Forest, Jerim, where the founder Park Hyokgyose was born. Yushin also followed the king. Guided by Princess Yosok, the king entered the west room and sat on the warm part of the floor, while Yushin sat facing east, humbly bowing his neck. Wine came in silver bottles and gold cups. This time, Yosok poured the wine herself. The appetizers were chestnuts, persimmons, and jujubes. The king forgot state affairs for a moment and thought of his daughter Yosok. The king looked around the room first. Solgyo's old pine and solitary magpie painting hanging on the north wall caught his eye. Just as birds were said to slide off trying to land on the pine tree in Solgyo's Hwangnyeongsa mural thinking it was real, this old pine and solitary magpie was truly realistic. It was a painting of a lone magpie sitting on a gnarly old pine tree as if about to fly away any moment. The king felt sad because the lonely magpie on the pine branch seemed like Princess Yosok, so he turned his eyes away. Next, the king's eyes fell on a gayagum hanging on the wall. Seeing the gayagum made him think of Gaia, and thinking of Gaia made him look back at Yushin. A Gwanam Avalokitesvara statue was enshrined in the west, and in the room was an agarwood desk and a mother-of-pearl sewing box. To the king's eyes, all these things looked desolate and pitiful. Although the king was not without Buddhist training, he still thought sentient beings should live in pairs and generate life. "Child." The king received the teacup Yosok offered, took a sip, and called Yosok while holding it in his hand. "What is your command?" Yosok held her left knee with both hands, lifted her head, and looked up at her father's graying beard. "What is your wish now?" The king said this. "I have no particular wish. My only wish is for your majesty to live for 10,000 years. Yosok replied. "No, I know your filial piety, but you must have a wish for yourself, so speak it without hesitation. Your father has become king. Can I not grant one wish of yours? Speak whatever you desire." "It is not a wish that can be fulfilled." Yosok lowered her head. "With this father in this world, what wish cannot be fulfilled? If you ask to climb the sky and pick a star, that might not be possible, but my wish is more difficult than climbing the sky and picking a star." The king drank the tea and handed the cup to Yosok. "Let's hear your wish. Is there a wish this father cannot fulfill?" He looked back at the queen and Yushin. The king felt it was an unbearable insult that there was something his power could not do. He even felt a kind of anger. Yosok was making tea without a word. "Speak straight away." The queen also urged from the side. Yosok rested her hands from making tea and said, "My wish is to be paired with the foremost man under heaven and give birth to a son foremost after your majesty to offer to the country." The king opened his eyes wide as if doubting his ears at first, then soon smiled all over his face and said, "Good. Your intent is good. Then do you have a person in mind? I will fulfill your wish, so speak." And he looked back at the queen and Yushin. The queen smiled, and Yushin smiled too. Princess Yosok blushed briefly, then said, "There is a person I have in mind, but he is like a star in the sky, a person beyond reach." The king stopped smiling. "What do you mean? Is there a person in this country who would refuse if asked to be your spouse? Do not be shy and speak straight." Showing his dignity, the king's eyes shone. "Who is he that he is so unreachable? Is there anyone in this country who would disobey my word? Even if it were Baekje or Goguryeo, if you desire, I will send an army to fight and achieve your wish, so speak straight." There was even a look of anger in the king's demeanor. Yosok offered all the tea, retreated to her seat, sat, and said, "The person I have set my mind on is Great Master Wonhyo." Great Master Wonhyo? The king could not help but be surprised too. The king had no personal friendship with Wonhyo. He had heard of Wonhyo from Yushin, and once praised him upon hearing that he had entered enemy lines to retrieve the bodies of Bin Yongja, Yosok's husband Geojin, and their servant Hapjol. But the king also knew that Great Master Wonhyo was an extraordinary figure. "So, you mean Great Master Wonhyo is the person you want?" the king asked with slight anxiety about whether it was possible. "Yes," Yosok answered, adjusting her collar. "How about it? Do you think Great Master Wonhyo will listen?" the king asked Yushin. Yushin lowered his head as if thinking for a moment, then lifted it and replied, "Well, Great Master Wonhyo is not a person who clings to precepts. I have seen him drink wine if given wine and eat meat if given meat, but as for marriage, I do not know." "Well, why don't you talk to him? Are you not friends with Great Master Wonhyo from old times, Han Bulsan? Is it not a happy event for Yosok to marry again? It has been a burden on my heart all my life." The king said this and looked at Yosok. The queen also looked at Yushin with pleading eyes. "As commanded, I will meet Great Master Wonhyo and speak to him, but I cannot guarantee if it will work or not. Wonhyo is a man who would do anything if he feels like it, but would not listen even to a command from heaven if it is not in his heart." "Is he that haughty?" the king marveled. "Though still a young monk, he will likely be a famous monk whose name will be transmitted for 1,000 autumns. I wish many such people would be born in our country. It is people, the power of people." Pausing briefly, the king who manages affairs prayed that heaven would send down many great people to this country, then said, "Anyway, Han Bulsan, please meet Great Master Wonhyo once. If that doesn't work, I will use other means." The king said this. Because of this event, the king sent items for Wonhyo's use to Munsu Temple. The king became very interested in this matter, both to resolve his daughter Princess Yosok's wish and to test Wonhyo. The king thought of it as a kind of wrestling match between Wonhyo and himself. Great Master Wonhyo received the items sent by the king and smiled broadly to himself. He anticipated that a great test would come to him in the future.